being a man and being a father, it's multi-layered in terms of what that role and responsibility is, right? And how you understand that. And a lot of times you have to be taught it. You have to be held accountable. You have to have skills, so you have to practice. And I think, but you have to just be yourself. And being yourself does not necessarily mean you have to react in a violent way. But the other thing is, what do you know to do to be able to resolve the situation without it turning into violence? But also wish, somebody would have told me, honestly, it's okay to cry. It's okay to cry, because there's so much stigma behind the crying and the vulnerability. To really be strong is to be able to know how to communicate, number one, and not keep your emotions in and be silent.
Welcome to DAP's podcast. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about fatherhood. So welcome, an old friend. Happy to have you here and be connecting with you and to talk with you about this topic and have you share your lived experience with us. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. When you get to my age, they say old, but you're like, oh, really? Am I old? But you mean old in terms of the time we've known each other. We've known each other. Right. That's right. No, it's all good. I accept it. Guy Bowling is my name, and I'm wearing a couple of different hats now, but I've worked in the field of family support probably for almost 30 years now. Primarily, specifically, my specialty has been an expertise working with low-income, non-custodial, never married or unmarried fathers, helping them overcome challenges that prevents them from being involved in the lives of their kids. And so I previously did some work with a large nonprofit organization, and I managed that program for almost 25 years. It started as a pilot project, did that for a while. Now I continue to do stuff in the community, and I do consulting, and I have a little small nonprofit that I started independently, still having me work with fathers. But yeah, my name is Guy Bowling, and I'm glad to be here.
Why don't we start with, if you're comfortable, talking a little bit about your experience in fatherhood. Mm-hmm. And how that's shaped your perspective and your journey into the work that you've done.
Great question, as I've had to often reflect on how my personal experience shaped me into not only being the man that I am and the father that I am, but also the work that I do and how they're connected. And I believe you're fortunate if you get a chance to, what they say, do work related to your purpose and your calling. It doesn't feel like work, right? And so my early experiences shaped me, and meaning I grew up in a fatherless household with a single mom. I had a couple of siblings. Unfortunately, my mom and dad weren't together, so I grew up without my father. But in the neighborhood I grew up in, I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois, there just was a number of different families where the father just wasn't present. And so I didn't even realize that was an issue within my family, because I didn't see that hardly anywhere. So you don't know what you don't know, right? But you will learn eventually. It'll play out the impact it'll have. And so part of it is grew up, didn't know my father. And then, as research and statistics say, there's a good likelihood that kids without fathers end up contributing to all these other societal ills, and part of that is teen pregnancy, right? And a lot of other things that I've come to learn personally, as well as even the work that I do. So I became a teen father at an early age. So I was a teen father, 15 years old, going on 16, no clue about what all that meant, let alone responsibilities and all that stuff. And so I was frightened, but my single mother, I knew she was going to be disappointed, because out of my siblings, I had siblings who had some bumps and bruises more than I had. I think I had similar bumps and bruises. I just didn't get caught. They got caught. But I learned what happens when you get caught. So I was a little reluctant to do what they did. But anyway, I ended up having a child, and I didn't want to disappoint my mom. So I was a little reluctant to tell her at first. But I eventually told her, and I ended up being I ended up being a custodial dad, and my son, who was born, lived with me and my mom, who helped me raise him until I moved out at 17 after high school, got my own place, got full custody of him. My mom said, "Are you ready?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah." So she helped me get an apartment, helped me get resources, helped me get on track to basically say, I know that you didn't have your father, but you're going to be a father to this child.
Mm-hmm.
But she also knew that by me being with my son every day, bathing him, feeding him, being around him, connecting with him, basically supporting him, that a bond was going to develop. Mm-hmm. And then I would be motivated to never, disconnect myself or be careful about decisions that I make that would put me or put a distance between us. Mm-hmm. And it worked. Mm-hmm. And so I said, I think I'm ready. So I went out and I took care of him and raised him until he was 18 and went off to college. But a lot of that, I believed, helped me begin to think about there was no resources available. Yeah. There were no programs. There were no services. There was mom. Yeah. That was it. Yeah. So went off and started this program back in 1999 to help low-income fathers overcome barriers that prevents them from being involved, because I had first-hand experience.
Will you define what custodial parent is for folks that might not know?
Yeah, the legal term of custodial parent is the parent that has custody of the child. Oftentimes, young men or low-income men, kids are born out of wedlock. The parents are not married, and oftentimes he has to petition the court for his rights to have access to his child, and that means custody, or that means parenting time, because mom automatically has it. Yep. And so at that time, mom went off to school, and I ended up getting full custody of my son, and I was the custodial parent. So it's the parent that has the custody of the child. Yeah, and I was the legal guardian of the child. Yeah.
Thank you. How would you say that your early childhood experiences and your life growing up really shaped your perspective around fatherhood?
It's funny. I've thought about that often. I think what it shaped was it gave me a unique perspective, not only in terms of the type of father that I wanted to be and that I had hoped to be, but also that I necessarily didn't have a role model or a blueprint on what that means, right? So I knew how I felt to not have my father there. I don't think I noticed it until I started competing in sports and I got older. And I'd say right around adolescence, junior high school age, and when I'm competing in sports, participating in sports. And, kids always want their parents there to cheer them on when they're doing anything, because it's just a sense of validation and some empowerment. And my mother worked a lot, so she wasn't able to come to a lot of the events and I was involved in everything in terms of sports, extracurricular activities. And so I had hoped, this would be perfect for me to have my parents here. And since my mom was working, I understood that. I was like, but man, it would be nice to have my dad in the audience to cheer me on. Yeah. I never got that. So then I began to feel that level of emptiness, well, wow, who is he? Why isn't he here? I need to support. I'm truly developing, evolving into a young man. So I'm going through those puberty, all those things. Yeah. And so for me, I would have to say, I knew I didn't want that to happen, even though I didn't plan for a child. A child came, for me just not knowing and not practicing, in terms of what to later come to understand is safe sex. So she got pregnant. So for me, of course, I was hit with all kind of emotions. I was scared. I was like, I'm terrified. I was like confused. I was like wanted to run. And then, a lot of responses that you get from folks that are not ready for that. They hope we in denial. No, that's not. I couldn't possibly, Yeah. But I knew how it felt as a child to not have a dad, and I didn't want my child to feel that way about me. So, and then my mom was like, "Oh, you don't have a choice. We gonna make sure that you're there for your child." Exactly. And so she was right. She was right.
So you just named a lot of emotions, and one of the concepts that we talk about at DAP in our program is the man box. And it really talks about a really narrow scope of the idea of masculinity. And that's like being tough, not crying, always having to be in control. Some of the things that, you were losing at that moment. Can you talk about how you have seen that show up in your life as a parent? And how... what were some of the messages that you grew up with around what it meant to be a man and how you had to counteract that maybe? What you leaned into, what you didn't?
I think one of the first things I was taught or I learned through family, through friends, through community is that, you're not supposed to cry, right? Men don't cry. Boys don't cry, right? even when we fall and hurt ourselves trying to learn to ride a bike or in the playground or in sports, I mean, you literally could be in pain. I mean, literally. But they say, well, and even moms would even say this, you know, continue to get up and keep going, stop crying and just get through it. But you're in pain, right? So you're going to be okay. Shake it off. Like, but I'm hurting, right? So when you're taught to be strong in those situations and you're taught to deny your own pain that you're going through, how are you empathetic towards anyone else's pain?
Right,
You're taught to deny your own pain. Suck it up, right?
Exactly.
So I think I was taught that, and it was really taught, be tough no matter what. Just be tough, right? You have to be. And in the environment I grew up in some of the poor areas of Chicago, you couldn't show vulnerability. You couldn't show a weakness. You couldn't tough because, you know, on the playground, kids were, you know, there's a pecking order. So there was constantly battles on who's the toughest. So you got that amongst peers. You got that in your family. If you got hurt, you got, as a boy or a soon-to-be man, you got to be tough no matter the circumstances. And then if I throw in, I didn't begin to discover this until I relocated to Minnesota once I got to junior high school. Society is just not kind to brown and black people, and you got to be resilient to put up with some of those things. And I'm a child of the 60s, late 60s, but we're just coming out of all that stuff, and things are starting to look up, but you have to be tough. You have to endure. And so I think a lot of it also, too, and men are considered, you know, at that time, I believe I was constantly fed the information that we're in a male-dominated society, so men has to always be in control.
Right.
You have to be in control. You have to be the provider. You have to be the protector. So I think when it comes to that, it just, showing emotion was just a weakness. You definitely couldn't cry. And that carried all the way up until me becoming an adult. So you didn't share that type of stuff. And I remember not even wanting to share that with my mom. I felt it, right? And I think that I bottled those emotions, right? And then I had to manage them all alone without any real support or direction or guidance on what do you do with all those feelings, right? Because things hurt, right? But learn to be tough and not be vulnerable.
Yeah. So what would you say would be some good feedback or guidance for how fathers can intentionally challenge that expectation in their everyday parenting?
I think it's funny. I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine on the way here, and I think one way to be able to do it is that you have to lead by example. You have to model it. You have to be emotional and or show your emotion and be okay in showing your emotions and not worried about the consequences of showing your emotions, because I think that's part of it for men too. But I also have learned through my own experiences, through being a dad, through working with dads, and now I think, you know, two of my biggest accomplishments in life personally is my two children. I have a daughter and I have a son. But now I have a grandson and a granddaughter, right? And for those out there who are grandparents, you know, if you're lucky enough to be blessed enough to have grandchildren, be around your grandchildren, you know, it's like a do-over. You get a chance to do it all over again, right? And so I've learned to not be so tough, not be so about structure and discipline, not so be like, you know, not emotional. So I have a grandson who's 10, right? And a granddaughter who's 12. And my granddaughter who's 12, she's more like me. Like, she kind of keeps her feelings in. She's kind of an athlete. She's really, like, competitive, and she don't want to show weaknesses. So I'm able to express to them it's okay, right? And then my grandson, he's just a sensitive kid. So he's like his dad. He's just, little stuff just bothers him, and he doesn't always know how to express himself. But so he wants to, you know, tear up. And so I've worked with him about how to manage those emotions when his feelings get hurt. So I think I'm just a little bit more patient and empathetic when I express it now, or even I'm with my grandkids to let them know it's okay to let it out. Yeah.
You said that you, even in your own experience, that you kind of held on to the teachings from your childhood until you became an adult. Like, what was the shift for you in adulthood? Like, what brought that on?
I would have to say that brought it on is, you know, as a father and as a man, I think that you're when you don't, I think oftentimes skills are about repetition. First have the knowledge and information, right, to understand. And then what do you need to do based on where you're at as far as being able to obviously express or even perform. You have to practice. You have to put in the work, right? And so you have to do that. And so I think that I learned over time, as you learn and understand, and then you practice, and then you repeat that you can become better at that. And I think that in being a dad and being a man, the other part about it is that a lot of times, a lot of young men who are growing up without their dads and like fathers or father figures, they don't necessarily understand what it means to be a man, what that means, what responsibility that comes with being a man. What is that rite of passage that even says you're a man? What does that mean? What does it mean to be a dad? What are your responsibilities? So if you don't really see that modeled before you, if you don't learn about that in any way, in an educated way, unfortunately, if mom is raising you and she's not necessarily sharing with that what that means, she can tell you about how to be an individual. But in terms of boy to manhood or manhood to fatherhood, who teaches you that outside of somebody in front of you, or you get education, or you read about it, learn about it. A lot of times you pick it up from TV. You pick it up from TV, television shows, or movies, or you hear it from friends in terms of the people that are around you. And so I think I learned it over time, and I think lots of kids, they set out, especially when they have that absence of their father, they say, you know what, when I become a man, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to do that based on what they got hurt by in terms of a man. I'm going to do this. I'm not going to do that based on what they got hurt by as a father. So they make a commitment to themselves. I'm going to be different. They'll say that, right? Well, that's the motivation.
You're right.
But that's not the knowledge and information on what it's going to take to do that. Because even though you say, I can say today, or as a kid, I want to be a professional basketball player. I want to be in the NBA. Because do you know what that takes
to get there.
What commitment it takes, right? What skills you have to have, what talent you have to be best with, what circumstances. I mean, it's all of that, and it's no different than any of us even to go into a profession. You know, when we were younger, we're like, I want to be this, I want to be that. Well, here's the process on how to get there. What are you willing to do? And these are the steps you need to take. And it's going to take, I mean, you have to be thoroughly understanding what that means.
Yeah, that's so much the story of so many of the guys that we work with, right? They come in and they're like, I know I want to be healthier. I know I want to have a better relationship. I know I don't want to do these things, but have absolutely no idea how to get there. And when they're done, they're usually like, man, why did nobody tell me this? I wish I had this when I was in high school. I wish I had this before I got married. I wish I had this way earlier in life. And like you said, it's practice. Even empathy, you have to practice.
You do.
Having empathy for yourself, having empathy for other people before it becomes more natural.
And sometimes what ends up happening is, I like to say this, right? So, and I'm not saying there's science behind it, but more along the lines of personal lived experience. It's like, you know, guys who, and a lot of times if they didn't see it modeled, right, they're not taught, they tend to reference what they've been around or what they've seen in terms of what they do when they think about what the right thing to do is. And so if you haven't seen healthy relationships modeled, healthy marriages modeled, you haven't been educated about that, the likelihood of you being in a healthy relationship or even knowing what it takes to be in a successful, effective relationship, you kind of fly by the seat of your pants, right? And then crises come up, right? Or challenges come up. And so you're trying to figure out how to get through it on your own, let alone get through it with your partner. And that creates all kind of, this all depends on what you both learned about how to manage crisis. And then that can create all kind of extra tension. And the guys don't know what they don't know. And I always like to say, even though this is actually impossible, I was like, before guys ever get into relationships, first of all, you should wait, first of all, until you're, especially of age appropriateness and things of that nature. I always say, man, we could understand our partner much more from an empathetic standpoint. If we had daughters before we ever got in a relationship, then we learned some empathy and patience and commitment and all that stuff. Because the last thing you want is that daughter's feelings to be hurt. You end up spoiling her. You might do it too much, right? But then again, you can be able to see how girls evolve and things that they experience and how they're made, and everybody's wired differently. But you learn patience and you learn communication and you learn how to ask questions. And a lot of times, and I'm saying this personally, I learned from my own daughter, all that being tough and being strong and all that stuff, there's a sense of it. But that's not the only thing that you should have in terms of to balance it out. You got to be in tune to understand your emotions too.
So if I'm going to ride that train, what does healthy masculinity look like? And what does being a healthy father look like?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with understanding that if you've been through some things, right, and you may not even realize that it's affecting how you are, who you are, what you do, and you may need to go get some help, professional help, and heal from it, right? Then again, and how do you heal properly to know that you have healed? And I think that's part of it too. And I think the other thing, it also looks like, and I learned this because here I am a professional. I've been working with folks with all kind of challenges, and mental health is huge, right? And getting professional help when it comes to that too, right? Dealing with the trauma, dealing with some of that stuff, but also being able to talk to somebody, get it out, right? Be able to get it out because that's therapeutic within itself to be able to do that. And it could be a professional person, or it could just be somebody within your network. You got to get the things out, because if you keep it bottled up, it just festers inside of you, and then it builds up, and then it can come out as rage and explosion. And so it's like touching a wounded animal, right? Yeah. And so I think that's part of it. I think the other part is that you learn about being patient, right? And it takes time, right? And it's almost like, and I'm pretty sure this is like cognitive thinking, right? What happened? How do you feel about it?
Yep.
What are you going to do about it? Do it.
Yep.
Then did it work?
Yep.
One way or another. Yep. You have to think it all the way through. And that comes with growth and maturity, right? To be able to critically think things through and not react based on what you're feeling at the time, because we all have feelings. How do you manage those feelings? How do you identify them? How do you manage them? And then how do you develop the skills so you can prevent it turning into something that you don't want it to become in the future?
So we talk a lot about like building folks' emotional intelligence and being able to really even learn what the language is and how to identify what your emotions are so that you have the ability to verbalize it. When you think about, building those skills, and you think about folks being like really stuffing their emotions down and suppressing their emotions because that's what they're taught is being a good man, right? And being a strong man. How do you think, how does that correlate to use of violence when it comes to being physically, emotionally, verbally violent? What link do you see in your experience?
I think it goes back to what you know, right? And what you've been taught, right? And I think in what your solutions are on how you resolve issues. A lot of times I think it's just it's funny that you asked that question, is because I was just as we just recently celebrated Juneteenth and all the things that come behind why and the what and and how why is still relevant today, especially for folks who are descendants of that and some of the things that are still institutionalized today, right? And so I think part of not doing that a lot of times, I came up during an era, and I'm not sure about your family, but it wasn't people. A lot of people think it was only in community of color, but I think it was across the board in terms of just our society. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, right? Spanking was normal. Spanking was normal. To hit somebody to correct the behavior, it was normal.
Yep.
And a lot of times it turned to abuse and things of that nature. And also responding violently to situations that were problematic. That was normal on how you solve and resolve your differences. Starting at the playground, you can go as already, but you can take it all the way down to early childhood, right? Yep. And how you see kids react to situations, and they automatically want to hit, or they even, where'd that come from?
Yep.
You learn that. Where does that come from? And so if that's the way you've been resolving differences, and especially a lot of times it even comes with a level of disrespect, or my feelings is hurt, so I want to lash back out to hurt you in a way I was just hurt, even if you didn't hurt me physically, but you hurt me emotionally, so I may want to respond to stop this, to correct the behavior. So physically, if I think I can, I will. Right. And it's all about what you think is the resolution as opposed to be taught what are your options on what to do. So I think that can come early on, because I just remember as a kid, and I was even taught as a kid, and I've even, taught, my own children about how do you respond in situations when you feel like you're being picked on, or you're being bullied. Well, I was taught when I was growing up during my time, you're being bullied, fight.
Right.
You fight or flight, for those things. And so when you're taught that, I think that stays with you until you learn a different way to handle it.
Right.
But I think the other part is what I'll say, and I'll use spanking as an example. So spanking was normal, and I spanked my kids initially because that's what I learned from my mother. That's what you do. You spank them, right?
Yep.
Right? Not abuse, but you spank them, right? But what's not, really, what's appropriate spanking? Really? Hitting somebody, is that ever appropriate, right? So, but again, it was normal, right?
Yep.
So I spanked my son initially, then him and my daughter are 16 years apart. So I spanked him initially, and my daughter, I never spanked because I learned more because I was in my profession by then. I knew it and educated about it. But I also think that, part of what, was helpful is that I remember even I got spanked growing up. My mom, would spank us all. But we got to a certain age, 12, 13 years old, and my mom would want to spank in the same way she did when we were kids. But now we're bigger.
Yeah.
Like, we're stronger.
She can't do that anymore.
Mom, you can't. No, we're not gonna we're not gonna fight you back, but we're not gonna let you harm us because now we're in protective mode.
Right.
We're not gonna let you. And so I remember my mother. It went from belt. First it went from her hand, then it went from belts, and then I think she used like racetracks and stuff. But as she got older, that stuff didn't work anymore. We're bigger, so now she wanted to use like her hand. So now you're like you're not even mom anymore. You're somebody outside of being mom trying to hurt me. So I'm going to protect myself. So I'm going to stop you from hurting me.
Right.
But ultimately, you learn that's not even an option anymore. Even the body will rebel. You just can't allow yourself. Or people will run. They're just not going to allow you just to hit them in that way. So I learned over time that if you have options, right, you learn. And then you also have repercussions, consequences. In addition to, I've worked with so many men over the years who have been incarcerated, right? Even have a family history of being incarcerated. And you'll talk to them about, it's always a touchy topic when I talk to the men who we work with about parent education and discipline and punishment. And you'll get into the same story that I'm talking about. There's some who are still new at it. Like, I believe in spirit of rise, spoil the child. I believe in spanking, right?
Yep.
Then there's other ones who are a little bit more older, who've learned a little bit more, who also have matured a little bit more. They'll say, even from the ones who've been incarcerated, they'll like, spanking didn't stop me from getting in here.
Right.
I still ended up making decisions that got me in here. So it wasn't the spanking. It was more about the lack of knowledge. It was the situation. It was the circumstances that got me in here. It was not knowing how to respond to my emotions that somebody did to offend me or disrespect me that I didn't know how to handle or wanted to control. So I think you just learn over time based on what you were taught, based on what you grow into maturing. And then there are also accountability and consequences too.
Yeah, we talk a lot about how, like, some of those things they can give you context for the why, but they don't necessarily excuse the fact that you're doing it now.
1,000%.
Right?
Yeah, 1,000%.
I think that holds so true. And you're talking about, well, what were you going to say?
No, and I think about that, and that carries over into relationships, right? The work that you do, right? Particularly in romantic relationships, right? And not thinking that you need to be the strong person. You have to be the person in control. I have to control this person's behavior. I have to figure out how to get them to correct their behavior. So the only way I know how to do it is either be a bit verbally abusive or physically abusive or both, or emotionally abusive, right? And so, because you want to control the situation without understanding what even contributed or prompted it to be that in the first place, and what are your options besides that. But if that's all you know, that's what you do, and you won't do it again or even think about the consequences of it until you face the consequences, right? And, I do some work also with the Minneapolis Police Department. I started an initiative with them about many years ago called the Black Men in Police Project. So I approached them about 10 years ago. Basically, what do we need to do to improve relationships between black men and the police? Because at this time, every time you looked up on the news, another unarmed. So I learned about them and their tactics, their policies, their procedures, their accountability, their training, and all those things. And I put in motion this plan to train cadets when they come in, put in place to do community presentations about the work that we're doing, also to do a lot of policy work with them and reform work. There's a lot of stuff that has come into play now. Even we talked about the consent decree, but they were open, right? But a lot of things they were saying, because they have those days too where when it's not, and you can see videos, many of them, when somebody's not being compliant, and not necessarily their life is at stake, but they feel to use the need to be forceful to get them to do that. And the person is not armed or anything else, but that's my way way to correct you.
Yeah.
And they have bad days, and so if they're temperamental, they can respond to that sooner than somebody who is not as temperamental to try to de-escalate it. And what they did tell me, to get back to what you were saying, is that some of the things that they hate to go on are domestic calls.
Yep.
Those are the calls they do not like because
100%.
they're not trained to de-escalate in that kind of way. There's all kind of emotions just flying high, and they find themselves just not wanting to have to be in those situations because they don't feel like that's the most appropriate use in terms of what they're expected to do.
Yeah.
But they're required to do it because it's part of their job.
Yeah. And it's the most common.
Yeah.
The most common type of call that they get.
Get
called to.
Absolutely.
So before we wrap, what advice would you give to other fathers who are trying to break free of toxic masculinity or healed from past harm?
I would say everything, and I even think about myself too. What I wish I could have been told, early on. Again, because, my mother, who passed away about 15 years ago, I remember her sharing with me early on, but this was her advice to protect her little boy in terms of if he runs into danger and he's out there on his own, this is what to do. I remember she sharing this, and then I'm like, I know you were trying to protect me, but that wasn't the right advice to give me. But she was like, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're outmanned, meaning because I was a little guy growing up, I was real small. I didn't have a growth spurt till like 11th, 12th grade, so I was a little guy, right? Yeah. So I get picked on a lot, right? But I was tough, but I didn't allow anybody just to pick on me, so I'd fight back. I didn't always win, no. But one of the things she said was, well, if they're bigger than you, you pick up something to make you just as big as them. Well, what is she actually teaching me? Like, really, assault, blah, blah, like. But I had that mentality because parents are the first teacher, right? And so I wish what I would be able to say to my younger self is that, to really be strong is to be able to know how to communicate, number one, and not keep your emotions in and be silent. I think the other part is you don't have to know everything. It's okay to appear weak, but not necessarily weak. But what you're trying to do is resolve the situation in a way that's beneficial to you both, as opposed to reacting a certain way, or what you think a man is supposed to do because you're worried about the perception, the reputation, and all that's going to happen. Because when you're younger, it's all about reputation. It's all about reputation. I hear men all the time, well, he said this, and he disrespected me, he said this, and what'd you do? Well, I was like, well, there's other ways we could have handled that, but you didn't know under the circumstances. Your reputation, all these emotions are flying. And I think the other thing that I've learned too, I was saying, being a man and being a father, it's multi-layered in terms of what that role and responsibility is, right? And how you understand that. And a lot of times you have to be taught it. You have to be held accountable. You have to have skills, so you have to practice. And I think, but you have to just be yourself. And being yourself does not necessarily mean you have to react in a violent way. But the other thing is, what do you know to do to be able to resolve the situation without it turning into violence? But I also wish, somebody would have told me, honestly, which is so funny because I find myself doing it today. It's okay to cry. It's okay to cry because there's so much stigma behind the crying and the vulnerability. I take men all the time out to do presentations to professionals, to dads, to moms, to kids, to schools, to churches, to just talk about, is part of the work that I'm doing now as part of the nonprofit that I created a couple of years ago after I left the Father Project. But it's a leadership development program for fathers who are at that next level of being better men and better fathers and better professionals, and how to sustain what they've accomplished to not go back to old behaviors. So it's the leadership development organization called Citizen Fathers. So I take them out to talk to audiences that talked about what they were dealing with when they came into the program initially for a crisis, what they accomplished while they were there. What plan now they have to sustain that, and how the community can learn from them. And so they tell their whole story. And I could tell you, so many people are so surprised. And I guess that's the perception of men in general, not necessarily men of color, but just men in general. We're so surprised that you guys allowed yourself to be so vulnerable and share your stories, right? And really talk about the pain and your emotions. We don't often hear that, or that's the perception that you're not that.
Men aren't encouraged to do that.
Absolutely. So we're so surprised. And I'm thinking to myself, because what I have learned and experienced, especially when I do get guys in a group setting, be it at your place and what you do, or in a parent group setting, or in a workforce development group setting, you give them the space to talk about stuff, and they feel safe and they feel comfortable, and you got facilitation. it all comes out.
Right.
It all comes out. So see, that's so abnormal to me to hear from others, but that's my experience.
Because that's your daily diet.
That's my daily stuff.
Yep.
But for others, like, we're not used to men talking like this. Wait a minute, your feelings hurt. Wait a second. So I think that's the other part of it too, is that you get an opportunity to be able to see folks and hear folks who you may have thought one way about, but in actuality, they hurt as well, and they want help, and they want support and guidance, and then role modeling and accountability.
Yeah.
I think that's the most important part.
That's awesome. Can you share a little bit about what you're doing right now, how people can reach you?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
They're interested in connecting.
Yeah, I didn't even get into that. Oh, wow. So I want to, what I'm doing right now, have a small nonprofit called Citizen Father. So I'm executive director of that. That's a small nonprofit. But also got a consulting business that I do, and I help leaders and organizations locally as well as throughout the country that work in the field of family support and organizational development. All the stuff I learned in my previous role in doing that, but also most importantly, effective strategies not only to design a model to work with men based on all the nuances and all the issues that they bring and what the model should look like. And if you don't have those things in place, because it's helpful to have a one-stop shop where you have all those things in place, because men have a lot of things that they're dealing with, especially those that come from poverty. But if you don't have those things, who are you connected with to have those? So I teach folks how to develop those relationships and partnerships.
Right.
I've even had an opportunity to partner with you in the past in a previous role of mine. But you can't do it all. You can't do it all. And then, so that's Citizen Father consulting business that I'm doing, helping people do that. So I help programs across the country who are building, managing, implementing, and evaluating programming. I do that across the country. And then also, too, I do a big event every year that I do in collaboration with a number of different community-based organizations called the Festival of Fathers and Families at North Commons Park.
Awesome.
That'll be August 9th. This is our 35th year of doing this.
Wow,
Absolutely.
congratulations.
Yeah. So it's in North Minneapolis, and it's a big event. It's a festival celebrating and recognizing fathers for their achievements, be it they had these issues initially, they've overcome these issues, they're now doing these things. So there's a special portion within the program that recognizes Fathers of the Year. There's performances, there's music, there's dancing, there's drum corps, there's all kind of different activities, face painting, birdhouse making, free food, free T-shirts, petting zoo. So all of that goes on in a span of like 5 hours over at North Commons Park. So that's coming up. Festival of Fathers. We're on Facebook. You can pull that up too. August 9th, 12 to 4. So that's another event. And lastly, what I do, I'll be at the Black Men Healing Conference that's coming up this week. Yep. And I'm presenting at a workshop because I also do some work with the county in Ramsey County. Like I said, I got many hats, but doing some work with the Ramsey County inside the system related to child support, because a lot of the men that I have come to know and work with, they have challenges fulfilling that financial obligation, particularly as it relates to child support. So I work with child support to help with training and technical assistance, but also looking at some of their practices and looking at how they can collaborate with others to help men be more successful and families more successful in putting men in position to be compliant as opposed to only being punitive. So
that's amazing.
A little bit of things that I'm doing.
Yeah, just a little bit. Just a little bit.
Last thing I'll say. Didn't get a chance to share this. I do have a podcast as well. Yeah. All right. I have a podcast that I started doing during the pandemic. It's called Citizen Father. It's a podcast that all things father. So we're on every Sunday at 12 o'clock. And so, again, it's on YouTube. It's on all the social media channels. So I'm in the podcast space as well.
That's awesome.
Yep, absolutely.
And we will link all of that when we post this. So 100%. Folks can get connected and hopefully go to the festival.
Yeah.
And
if you, just really quick, if you are a vendor or you are a family service agency or just an agency that can provide information to the community, we do have an information tent where you can table and come and pass out your information too. So
how can folks connect about that?
612-483-9719, or they can email me at gbowlingenterprises@gmail.com.
Awesome.
And I'll send you all the information.
Thank you so much. It was lovely to have you and
Good
reconnect.
to see you. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom and experience.
Thank you.
And looking forward to connecting about all of those other
all this other stuff that I'm doing. Right. You know, I think once it's part of I'll leave it with this because they brought me I talked to you about this off air, but I was blessed to be a Bush Fellow about 5 years ago during the pandemic and George Floyd, all that stuff. But it brought me back in to talk with the most recent recipients of the Bush Fellowship, about 25 people who just won the fellowship this year as well as last year. So I talked to them about my experience as a Bush Fellow. And one of the things they asked me, they said, like, could you give any words of wisdom before we leave? And one of the things I said, I truly believe this. I think there's 2 important days of our life, right? And for me, it has meant the day we're born and the day we find out why. And I'm lucky to have found out my why.
That's amazing.
So I'm continuing to do it. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Appreciate having you here.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks so much.